Lewis Hamilton's car was sabotaged at the Monaco Grand Prix, and Leclerc benefited from a better qualifying position. Stay until the end to see the brutal punishment the FIA gave to Ferrari. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Lewis Hamilton remained rooted at the far end of the Monaco paddock long after the crowds had dissipated, long after the roar of the engines had faded into the night air. His race suit was half undone, clinging to his waist, while sweat mixed with sea breeze clung to his skin. His helmet dangled in his hand, but his eyes were locked on something invisible in the distance, caught somewhere between raw anger, disbelief, and a burning electric sense of betrayal that he couldn't shake. It wasn't the P6 finish that stung the most. It wasn't even that Charles Leclerc had finally secured his long-dreamed victory on the streets of Monte Carlo in front of the adoring tifosi. It was what Lewis had felt from the very first lap, the creeping, suffocating certainty that something far more sinister was happening under the surface. Something that had absolutely nothing to do with pace or strategy or the tight, unrelenting barriers of Monaco. He hadn't wanted to believe it when the feeling first took hold. The first lap out of Saint Devote felt wrong, not sluggish like a cold tire phase or a high fuel load, but wrong. The car didn't bite into the corners the way it had during Friday's practice sessions. The rear wasn't rotating. The exits felt like he was towing an anchor. The brake bias was drifting without his input. He keyed in override commands on the wheel. Nothing responded the way it should. It wasn't poor setup. It wasn't tire temperatures. It wasn't even strategy. It felt like someone had reached into the soul of the W15 and crippled it from the inside out. Every corner, every sector, every lap only reinforced the same gut-churning instinct. This was deliberate. This was sabotage. When the race was over, he didn't even acknowledge the radio. He didn't wave to the fans. He didn't speak to the media. He stormed directly toward the back of the Mercedes garage, eyes scanning faces, some confused, some avoiding his gaze. He walked right past the debrief room, ignoring the engineers waving him in. He was headed for only one man, Toto Wolff. The team principal stood beside the pit wall monitor array, arms crossed, lips drawn tight, watching Hamilton approach with that same unreadable Austrian calm he'd always worn in moments of chaos. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. They did something to the car, Hamilton said, stopping inches from him. His voice wasn't loud, but it was hard, cold, controlled, but only barely. Toto didn't blink. Who? I don't know yet, Hamilton snapped, his voice low and dangerous. But it wasn't us. It wasn't wear or driving style or a bad stint. The deployment wasn't what we mapped. The damper response was off. Rear grip vanished by lap 6. The DRS was lagging in sectors where it was automatic yesterday. There's no way that just happens. Someone tampered with it. I know what the car is supposed to feel like, and that wasn't it. Wolff looked him dead in the eyes. You're absolutely sure? I've been driving F1 cars longer than some of the kids on this grid have been alive. This wasn't a miscalculation. It wasn't a technical glitch. It was deliberate. I want diagnostics. All of it. FP3 logs, quali logs, race day data. I want a full audit. And I want every access terminal in the paddock cross-checked. If someone touched my car, I want to know when, how, and who authorized it. Wolff's expression didn't change, but his jaw twitched. That was all Hamilton needed to see. The message had landed. A silent nod passed between them before Wolff turned on his heel and started barking orders to the telemetry team. Within the hour, the data engineers, poring over layers of telemetry and security protocols in a sealed diagnostics room, began flagging anomalies. The first was subtle rear damper values that were different than those saved in the Park firm setup sheets. The second was more damning, an alteration to the energy deployment mapping. The override wasn't just a suboptimal map, it was an older limited version used for long runs in FP1. No driver in their right mind would use that in a race. Not at Monaco. But the real shock came with the audit trail. Someone had accessed the control system 2 hours before the race from a remote terminal. The terminal was not located in the Mercedes garage. In fact, the IP address wasn't even registered under the team's official network. The engineers stared at the timestamp, 11:42 a.m. local time. The override had been injected directly into the car's control unit through a wireless maintenance uplink that should have been disabled under FIA protocol. But it wasn't. Somehow, someone had found a backdoor. When Toto handed Hamilton the initial report, Lewis scanned it in silence. The numbers spoke for themselves. Delta times in sectors 2 and 3 were off by up to half a second compared to his Friday long-run data, despite similar fuel loads and tire condition. Brake bias was oscillating on its own. Torque delivery had a deliberate delay encoded into the throttle curve. Someone had systematically neutered the car. This wasn't internal, Lewis said finally, his voice cold as steel. Whoever did this had access. Deep access. Someone who knew how to get around the safeguards. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. Toto didn't respond right away. But his silence said everything. If this was what it looked like, the implications were massive. Security breach. Sabotage. Maybe even corporate espionage. And more importantly, someone had targeted Lewis specifically. Not George Russell. Not both cars. Just Lewis. Why only me? He asked aloud, eyes narrowing. Why this race? Who benefits? It was then that the seed of doubt bloomed into something darker, because it wasn't just about the car. It was about the politics. The contracts. The future. Lewis Hamilton was in the final months of his Mercedes deal. Rumors had already begun circulating that he was in talks with Audi for 2026. Others whispered Ferrari. Some said retirement. But what if someone inside, or outside, wanted to force his hand? Damage his results? Undermine his confidence? Undercut his market value? What if this wasn't just sabotage? What if it was a message? Across the paddock, in the warm glow of Ferrari's hospitality unit, Charles Leclerc raised his glass to a crowd of clapping mechanics, his white and red race suit still streaked with champagne. The cameras loved it. The fans adored it. But behind the scenes, the storm clouds were gathering. Because Lewis Hamilton had seen through the smoke. And he wasn't going to let it go. Subscribe just to stay tuned for the Formula One news no one else explains to you. When the data analytics division within Mercedes received the first wave of compiled IP traffic logs, there was an immediate alarm. The data pointed to something disturbing, an unauthorized access event timestamped just 38 minutes before lights out. The origin? Not from Brackley, not from any known team system. It traced to a restricted FIA terminal deep within the secure area used for pre-race scrutineering procedures. A zone not only off-limits to all but a select few officials, but one that occasionally allowed limited access to Ferrari technical liaisons for data confirmation purposes. This wasn't just a security breach. This was surgical, coordinated, intentional. Toto Wolff didn't wait. He picked up the direct line to the FIA president, bypassing all formal protocols. His voice was icy, clipped, devoid of the usual corporate polish. "We have a problem," he said, "and you're going to want to see what our team just found. It concerns race integrity. It concerns tampering. And it points directly at a terminal your organization controls." By that time, Lewis Hamilton was already in motion, not to the motorhome, not to his engineers, but to the nerve center of the race, the FIA's race control office. He had a data stick clenched in his fist, his thoughts racing faster than any car on track. He wasn't acting as a 7-time world champion now. He was a man on a mission, betrayed by a system he once trusted. He had the look of someone who'd seen the invisible hands behind the curtain, and who wasn't going to let them stay invisible much longer. Inside the dim, tightly monitored control room, Lewis didn't sit. He plugged in the stick, called up the logs, and walked the FIA stewards and technical directors through every single line. "This log file," he said, tapping the screen. "This one right here. It shows a remote override command issued to my car's engine control unit. 47 minutes before the race. Our systems are triple firewalled, air-gapped from any external interface. This override didn't originate from our side. It came from a secure FIA terminal." There was a heavy silence in the room, thick with implication. One of the senior stewards, a man with decades of motorsport experience, leaned forward, squinting at the data. "Are you telling us you think this was sabotage?" Hamilton's jaw flexed. "No. I'm not thinking. I'm telling you. Someone interfered with my car's performance. The IP that issued the command was tagged to an access point Ferrari personnel are authorized to use. I don't care who it was, or why they did it. But if we let this slide, what's next? Who's next? There was no laughter. No dismissal. Only a flurry of quiet murmurs and the hurried tapping of keys as the FIA's own internal cybersecurity lead began his verification protocol. Within the hour, the FIA launched a silent internal investigation. No public announcement, just whispered instructions and late-night calls to scrutineers and data marshals. The terminal in question was seized. Access logs were pulled. Interviews began. By midnight, an encrypted message was sent to all team principals. The FIA had initiated a forensic inquiry into a potential breach of protocol involving unauthorized access to race-critical vehicle systems. A preliminary opinion would be shared publicly within 24 hours. No names. No accusations. But the tension was immediate and unmistakable. In the paddock, the whispers morphed into shouts within hours. Mechanics muttered over coffee. Engineers leaned in closer over telemetry. Journalists circled like vultures, sniffing for blood. At the far end of the harbor, Charles Leclerc was on a high. Champagne still clung to his race suit, a thin mist of victory in the Mediterranean air. He was basking in the glow of a race that, to the public eye, looked like a career-defining moment. Then his phone buzzed. A private message. Short. Direct. No PR team. No formal language. Message from Lewis Hamilton. Can we talk? Privately. Not a media moment. Just us. Charles felt his stomach shift. He read the message twice, then again. He hadn't spoken to Lewis much that season, not off the record. Not like this. He replied. They met behind the Red Bull hospitality deck, in a shaded corridor that still smelled faintly of tire compound and champagne. Charles arrived first, posture straight, still glowing with post-race adrenaline. Lewis came next, slower, more methodical, every step deliberate. I'm not here to ruin your night, Lewis said, his voice low, steady. But I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me, man to man. Charles's smile faded, replaced by confusion. What's going on? Someone tampered with my car. The FIA is investigating. They found a remote override initiated from a terminal that Ferrari has access to. Charles blinked. Wait, what? Are you saying we did this? I'm saying someone did. And it wasn't us. You gained a full second on me per lap after the third turn. That doesn't just happen. And now I know why. Charles's face tightened. Lewis, come on. I swear to you, I had no idea. I didn't even know anything was wrong with your car until after the race. Lewis nodded slowly, eyes locked. I want to believe that. And I do believe you didn't know. But this wasn't a coincidence. Someone made sure I wouldn't challenge you today. And they knew exactly how to do it. You think I don't deserve the win, Charles said, his voice suddenly brittle. I think you drove like a champion, Lewis answered. I watched the footage. I saw the laps. But what happened to me taints everything. Not just today. The sport. The trust. The fairness. If we let this go, we're done. F1 is done. Leclerc looked away, then back. What do you want from me? Nothing, Lewis said. Not yet. But if your team finds out anything at all, you need to come forward. Because this doesn't stop with me. It never does. Charles didn't respond right away. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, then turned and walked back into the night, into the glow of cameras and cheers, his mind now shadowed with doubt. Meanwhile, inside the FIA's mobile command center, the investigation was escalating. The access logs confirmed multiple logins to the scrutineering terminal from a credentialed user badge registered under a pseudonym. The security camera outside the room had been disabled at the same time the login occurred. Whoever had done this knew the system, knew the blind spots, and most dangerously, knew how to hurt a car without leaving fingerprints. Back in the Mercedes motorhome, Toto watched the feed, arms crossed, saying nothing. Hamilton stood beside him, silent too, staring at the lines of data that now told a story no telemetry could ever explain on its own. A story of betrayal, deception, and something far worse than losing a race, losing faith in the very foundation of competition. And still, the paddock buzzed. Some said Ferrari had no reason to risk everything like this. Others whispered that maybe, just maybe, there were elements inside the team acting without orders. Rogue engineers. External actors. Political sabotage. Some pointed fingers at rival suppliers with hidden loyalties. The theories multiplied by the hour. But Lewis knew one thing as the night stretched into morning: he would not let this go. Not now. Not ever. Because if victory could be stolen with a keystroke, then Formula One wasn't a sport. It was theater. And he had spent his entire life fighting for something real. Just after the tension had begun to settle like the haze following a summer storm, the air shifted again, charged with something heavier. Footsteps echoed against the garage corridor. Frederick Vasseur, the Ferrari team principal, had arrived. Not walking, storming, almost. He had clearly caught wind of what was unfolding, probably not through official channels, but through that always reliable grapevine of engineers, journalists, and mechanics that somehow knew everything before the press did. His face betrayed nothing, but his eyes scanned with the intensity of a man used to managing crisis under pressure. "Charles," he said sharply, his voice clipped, his tone unmistakably strained, "I need a word." The Frenchman didn't wait for an answer. He barely even looked at Charles Leclerc before casting a hawkish glance at the man standing beside him, Lewis Hamilton. The 7-time world champion didn't budge, didn't blink, didn't defer. "No," Hamilton said, his voice low but firm, edged with steel. "Let's not play games, Fred. Did someone from your team access the FIA terminal today? Yes or no?" There was a pause, a heavy loaded silence that seemed to stretch infinitely before Vasseur even responded. His brow furrowed, his voice cool and defensive, but not yet combative. "I've already spoken to our engineers," he said, steady but clearly annoyed at the insinuation. "No one did anything illegal. We're just as surprised as you are. If there's been any breach, believe me, Ferrari wants answers too." Hamilton stepped forward, his posture unreadable, calm on the surface but unmistakably brimming with energy that could combust at any moment. "Then prove it," he said. "Cooperate fully. Hand over everything. Logs. Credentials. Wireless access histories. Don't just tell me you're innocent, show me. Because I'm not accusing Charles. I'm accusing someone with a motive and the tools. Someone who got into a system no one should have been able to touch. Someone who cost me qualifying." Vasseur's face stiffened. His next words were quieter, more deliberate. "You think I'd gamble this team's entire legacy, this badge, this name, on something so reckless? You think I'd allow someone in red to sabotage another team for pole position? That's not Ferrari." Hamilton leaned in slightly, eyes locked. "I think somebody did. Whether you knew or not, is your problem now." The standoff didn't escalate beyond that. No shouting. No threats. Just a cold standoff between two powerful men caught in the middle of a fire neither of them fully understood yet, but both were being singed by. Leclerc stood awkwardly beside them, caught in the gravitational pull of the confrontation but unable to influence it. He didn't speak. He didn't move. And that silence screamed louder than any denial. Later that evening, back in the sterile and dimly lit confines of the Mercedes motorhome, tension boiled over. Not through loud voices or slammed fists, but through data. Cold, inescapable data. The technical team had completed a second sweep, an even deeper forensic audit of the car's electronic footprint. Toto Wolff sat at the head of the briefing table, flanked by his engineers, analysts, and security consultants. Hamilton stood behind his chair, arms folded, eyes fixed on the screen ahead. What they saw next turned suspicion into confirmation. "We found it," one of the software engineers said flatly, as if announcing the weather. But what followed landed like thunder. A wireless override signal. An unauthorized ping. It had been executed just minutes before Hamilton's lap had unraveled in Q3. It wasn't brute force, it was elegant. Precise. A vulnerability in the FIA scrutineering system had been exploited. A backdoor, possibly unintentional, had been used to send a command directly to the W-15's engine control unit. It bypassed local telemetry filters, going through a cloud-based relay, and issued a throttle modulation sequence that subtly disrupted engine mapping during the critical seconds of Hamilton's flying lap. Enough to cost him 3/10. The origin? That was the bombshell. The command's digital signature had been encrypted, but not well enough. The Mercedes Security Division, with help from cybersecurity partners on retainer, had managed to extract pattern fragments. These fragments didn't lead directly to a person, but to a methodology, a blueprint. And that blueprint matched coding structures previously seen in Ferrari's internal development environments. Not conclusive. Not yet. But damningly close. The Mercedes room erupted into an intense series of questions. How had the system been left exposed? Who had first noticed the glitch in Hamilton's lap telemetry? Why hadn't the FIA's own tech protocols caught the breach? Was this a one-time attack, or had this method been used before, and gone unnoticed? Hamilton sat now, finally lowering into his seat. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said, without looking at anyone, "We're not just racing anymore. This is warfare." Toto leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched, fists steepled beneath his chin. "If Ferrari did this," he said quietly, "it's not just about disqualification. It's criminal." "They won't go down without a fight," Hamilton added. "But we've got the first piece. And we're not letting it go." Calls were made. FIA compliance officers were contacted. Mercedes legal counsel began drafting formal complaints. The paddock would wake up to a storm the next morning. But for now, in that room, the storm had already arrived. And in another part of the paddock, under the quiet glow of fluorescent lights, a lone Ferrari engineer sat in front of a laptop, deleting files. Toto Wolff shot up from his chair with the kind of explosive energy that rattled the walls of the Mercedes briefing room. His voice, sharp and unfiltered, echoed off the glass panels as he pointed furiously at the telemetry data spread across the table. "This isn't a mistake. This isn't some data glitch. This is espionage. Sabotage. A direct and premeditated attack on the core of what this sport is supposed to stand for. They didn't just mess with your pace, Lewis. They tampered with the integrity of an entire Grand Prix. They made a mockery of the rules, of the competition, of everything." Lewis Hamilton stood still, his back to the room, eyes fixed on the deep, dark horizon of the Monaco coastline. The lights of the city shimmered against the sea like stars shattered on black velvet. But none of it registered. Not tonight. Not after what he'd just endured. "And if they got away with it this time," he said quietly, almost to himself, "what's to stop them from doing it again? To anyone? To any driver, any team, at any track?" Toto didn't answer. He didn't have to. The silence between them was a verdict in itself. Something had been broken, something sacred. And it wasn't just the setup of a car or the result of a race. It was trust. In the system. In the regulators. In the very soul of motorsport. At 7:32 the next morning, just as the first streaks of gold began painting the Monaco sky, the FIA summoned the global press to an emergency conference. The room was already humming with tension by the time the lights dimmed and the emblem of the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile glowed ominously on the backdrop. There was no music. No introductions. Just a woman in a black suit with the composure of a diplomat and the gravity of a judge. Isabelle Fournier, the official spokesperson for the FIA, stepped forward and adjusted the microphone with a precision that seemed painfully ironic in the context. Following the allegations brought forth by Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One driver Sir Lewis Hamilton, she began, her voice clipped and clinical, and the immediate internal inquiry initiated thereafter. "We have uncovered verified evidence of unauthorized access to core FIA performance calibration systems within the 48-hour window preceding the Monaco Grand Prix." A collective intake of breath surged through the room like a wave crashing over rocks. The journalists looked at each other, stunned, some mouthing silent expletives, others already hammering at their phones and laptops. Cameras clicked and whirred, but for several seconds, no one spoke. Fournier continued, unshaken. This access, which was both deliberate and highly sophisticated, resulted in alterations to the telemetry parameters specific to car number 44, Lewis Hamilton's car. The modifications, though subtle, were substantial enough to create artificial drag and disturb brake balance, thereby compromising both qualifying and race day performance. She paused, letting the words sink in. "Let me be clear. We have not yet determined the perpetrator. The investigation is ongoing. However, all third-party access to FIA race systems has been suspended with immediate effect, pending a full forensic audit. This is not just a breach of trust. It is a potential criminal offense. And we will pursue it accordingly." In the paddock, The fallout began instantly. Teams that had been whispering in corners the night before now held closed-door meetings that stretched for hours. Ferrari issued no comment, their silence louder than any denial. Red Bull released a tightly worded statement affirming their belief in transparency and fair competition. But the most striking words came from McLaren CEO Zak Brown, who did not mince them. "This is the most serious accusation we've seen in modern F1 history," Brown said in an impromptu briefing outside the McLaren motorhome. "If a team's effort was compromised through deliberate digital interference, then no one is safe. We stand with any team, any driver, whose integrity has been violated." The pit lane, usually a symphony of sound and motion, now felt like a cathedral in mourning. Mechanics whispered instead of shouting. Engineers looked over their shoulders before speaking. No one trusted anyone anymore. Even long-standing friendships between team principals felt frayed, as if some invisible rot had suddenly revealed itself beneath the surface. On the balcony of his motorhome, Lewis Hamilton stood alone, leaning against the railing, eyes scanning the paddock below. But it wasn't the same place anymore. Not for him. Not after Monaco. The space that once felt like home, the garage, the pit wall, the grid, now felt alien. Compromised. And so did the sport itself. He wasn't thinking about titles now. He wasn't thinking about points, standings, or strategy. He was thinking about justice. About betrayal. About how many races he had pushed through the pain, how many times he'd fought against the odds, never suspecting that the battle wasn't just with rivals, but with ghosts hiding inside the very system meant to protect them all. That night, long after the media trucks had packed up and the last espresso had gone cold, Lewis sat in his motorhome with Toto once more. No cameras. No press. Just two men at war with an invisible enemy. Toto, visibly exhausted but more focused than ever, spoke with the quiet fury of a man who knew this fight was bigger than racing. "This isn't about winning anymore," he said, voice gravelly from too little sleep and too many phone calls. "It's not even about your car. This is about principle. About whether we allow corruption to hide behind technology. About whether we let fear keep us silent." Lewis didn't speak right away. He just stared down at the floor, jaw clenched, mind racing. Then he looked up, eyes sharp, resolute. "Then we go all the way," he said. "We expose it. No matter where it leads. No matter who it implicates. I don't care if it's teams, individuals, tech companies, or the FIA itself. We bring it all down if we have to. Because if we don't, this sport dies." Toto gave a single nod. "Then we fight." And in that moment, something changed. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't just about Monaco. It was about every underdog who ever felt the odds were stacked against them. Every racer who dared to believe in meritocracy. Every fan who loved the sport for its purity, for its raw, unfiltered human drama. It was about restoring something that had been quietly stolen from all of them. Lewis Hamilton had been wronged. And he was angry. But it was a different kind of anger now, not the frustration of a bad pit stop or a questionable penalty. This was deeper. More personal. It was the fury of a man who had given everything to a system that may have betrayed him, and who had nothing left to lose in the pursuit of truth. He wasn't just racing anymore. He was on a mission. And this time, there would be no lifting off the throttle.